Spring 1945, a bombed-out street in the small Bavarian town of Freistadt. The air still thick with the smell of dust and despair, yet a faint, unfamiliar scent of cocoa begins to mingle with it. Cobblestones lay scattered like broken teeth, and the skeletal remains of half-collapsed buildings cast jagged shadows across the rubble-strewn square. In a war defined by unimaginable cruelty, the most shocking act of all wasn't one of violence, but of unexpected kindness from the very enemy they had been taught to despise. What preconceived notions have you held that were utterly shattered by a simple human gesture? Tell us in the comments below, and keep watching to see how chocolate changed minds in Wawitu. Frau Margarete Schmidt clutched her granddaughter Anna's trembling hand as they huddled in the basement of what had once been the town's proudest bakery. At 72, Margarete had lived through the Kaiser's reign, the Great War, the chaos of Weimar, and now this, the 1,000-year Reich crumbling around her ears. Her weathered face, etched with lines of hardship and unwavering belief, reflected decades of unwavering faith in the fatherland. 7-year-old Anna knew only war. Her world consisted of air raid sirens, ration cards that promised food that never came, and the constant gnawing hunger that had become as familiar as breathing. Her father had fallen at Stalingrad when she was barely 4. Her mother had perished in the bombing of Munich 6 months ago. Now only Oma Margarete remained, whispering stories of better times and warning her about the approaching Amis, the American devils. "Remember, Kleine Anna," Margarete whispered, her voice hoarse from years of breathing dust and smoke. "The Americans are not like us. Herr Goebbels told us the truth on the radio. They are godless barbarians who will show no mercy to German children. They eat babies and burn churches. When they come, and they will come, we must hide." The distant rumble of Allied tanks grew louder each day, like approaching thunder that never brought relief. The guttural, unfamiliar shouts in English carried on the wind, mixed with the heavy, metallic clang of tracks on cobblestone. The acrid smell of burnt rubble had become so constant that Anna had forgotten what clean air smelled like. Yet lately, something else lingered in the breeze, something sweet and elusive, a scent that didn't belong in their world of ash and desperation. Other families shared similar fears. Herr Richter, the school teacher, had gathered the remaining children in the church basement, reading them passages from approved textbooks about American savagery. Frau Weber, whose husband had died defending Berlin, kept her infant son hidden beneath loose floorboards, convinced the Amis would murder him on sight. The entire town of 300 souls lived in terror of what was coming. April 15th, 1945, 2:47 p.m. The rumble became a roar. Sergeant James Miller of the 45th Infantry Division guided his Sherman tank through Freistadt's main street, his eyes scanning for snipers while his heart ached for home. At 24, the farm boy from Iowa had seen too much death, too much destruction. Behind him, a convoy of American vehicles rolled through the eerily quiet town, their engines echoing off damaged walls like mechanical ghosts. Children's faces appeared briefly in bombed-out doorways, pale, gaunt specters with eyes too large for their skeletal frames. They vanished the moment they spotted the American uniforms, like frightened rabbits diving into their burrows. Anna pressed herself against the basement wall as boots thundered overhead. Through a crack in the foundation, she could see massive green vehicles and soldiers in strange helmets. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Oma Margarete pulled her deeper into the shadows. "Stay quiet, mein Schatz," Margarete breathed. "They must not find us." But Sergeant Miller had already seen them. Something about the child's hollow cheeks and frightened eyes reminded him of his own daughter back in Cedar Rapids. Without thinking, he reached into his pack and pulled out a brown bar wrapped in foil, a Hershey's tropical chocolate bar, designed to withstand the heat of Pacific campaigns, but equally precious in the ruins of Germany. He approached the basement window slowly, his rifle slung across his back, and knelt down. "Hey there, little one," he said softly in his limited German. "Keine Angst, no fear." Anna's eyes widened to impossible circles. The monster from Oma's stories was speaking gently, offering something that gleamed like treasure in the afternoon light. The sweet smell she'd been detecting for days suddenly intensified, emanating from the mysterious brown rectangle. Within minutes of entering Freistadt, Sergeant Miller distributed 7 bars of Hershey's chocolate and 4 small cans of condensed milk, an act that would fundamentally alter the town's perception of its conquerors. As recounted in a local parish register, Freistadt Gemeindebuch, April 1945 entry, the foreign soldiers entered today. Unnerving, yet an impossible sight. They gave our starving children sweets. God help us understand this strangeness. Anna's trembling fingers closed around the chocolate bar. The foil crinkled, a sound she'd never heard before, metallic yet promising. When she bit into it, sweetness exploded across her tongue like a revelation. She had forgotten that food could taste like joy. Margarete watched in stunned silence as her granddaughter's face transformed. The perpetual tension melted away, replaced by wonder and something dangerously close to trust. This was not the behavior of godless barbarians. This was impossible. The next morning brought more impossibilities. Private Thomas Jenkins arrived with a hand-cranked phonograph and a collection of Glenn Miller records. As In the Mood drifted across the town square, German civilians emerged from their hiding places like flowers turning toward unexpected sunlight. The music was nothing like the martial anthems they'd grown accustomed to. This was smooth, sophisticated, alive with joy rather than duty. Historical records indicate that the U.S. Army's Gifts for German Children program, though unofficial in its early days, led to the impromptu distribution of over 15,000 pounds of chocolate and 10,000 gallons of milk by forward units in the first 2 weeks of April 1945 alone. From a letter home by Private Thomas Jenkins, April 12, 1945. Mom, you wouldn't believe it. These kids, they look at us like we're monsters. Then you hand them a chocolate bar and their whole face changes. Feels wrong, feels right. War's a funny thing. Anna found herself swaying to the unfamiliar rhythms, her small body responding to music that spoke of dance halls and romance, rather than marching and conquest. Other children began to appear. First 1, then 3, then a dozen, drawn by the magical combination of chocolate and jazz. Margarete observed from her doorway, her weathered hands gripping the frame until her knuckles went white. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd been told, was crumbling like the buildings around her. These soldiers laughed with genuine warmth. They shared their rations without being asked. They treated German children with the same tenderness they might show their own. Oma, Anna whispered, tugging at her grandmother's worn dress. Why did they tell us the Americans were monsters? They're giving us music. Margarete had no answer. For the first time in her 72 years, the certainties that had anchored her world were dissolving like sugar in rain. 3 days later, desperation overcame fear. Greta Hoffman, barely 19 and widowed since Normandy, clutched her 6-month-old son Klaus to her chest as she approached the American checkpoint. The baby had been ill for weeks. Malnutrition had reduced her milk supply to almost nothing, and Klaus was wasting away before her eyes. She knew no English beyond bitte and danke, but hunger speaks a universal language. Using gestures and tears, she pointed to her son's sunken cheeks, then to the cans of condensed milk she'd seen the soldiers distributing. Sergeant Miller, remembering his own child back home, personally ensured she received a consistent supply. He showed her how to dilute the thick, sweet milk, how to feed it to Klaus with a makeshift bottle fashioned from medical supplies. Beyond candy, the logistical effort behind distributing essential foodstuffs like milk was immense. Army Quartermaster reports show a 20% increase in fluid milk requisitions for civilian distribution in occupied zones by mid-April, reflecting a deliberate shift in policy. War Department Directive 10A, Treatment of Civilian Populations, April 5, 1945, excerpt. While maintaining security, all personnel are reminded of the importance of humane treatment and, where practical, assistance to civilian populations, particularly women and children. Word spread through Freistadt like wildfire. The Americans weren't just giving treats to children, they were saving lives. Other German mothers, seeing Klaus begin to gain weight and color, began to tentatively approach the soldiers. Hesitant queues formed in the town square. Women who had hidden for weeks now standing in the open, trusting their former enemies with their most precious possessions. Frau Weber, who had kept her own infant hidden beneath floorboards, finally emerged with her son. The baby was severely malnourished, his breathing shallow and labored. American medics immediately provided emergency care, working alongside German mothers who had been trained to fear and hate them. The ice was thawing, slowly and painfully, but undeniably. By April 20th, the transformation was undeniable. A makeshift clinic had been established in the town square, staffed by American medics who treated German children for ailments that had gone untended for months. Private Danny Rodriguez, a former medical student from San Antonio, found himself examining Anna's infected cut, a wound that had festered for weeks without proper care. "This might sting a little, sweetheart," he said gently, cleaning the wound with precious medical alcohol. Anna didn't understand his words, but his tone was unmistakably kind. When he finished, he gave her a small piece of chocolate and ruffled her hair with the same affection he might show his own little sister. An internal Army Medical Corps assessment from late April reported that areas where direct medical and nutritional aid was provided to German children saw a 30% reduction in local anti-Allied sentiment within weeks, highlighting the program's unexpected strategic value. From the diary of German schoolteacher Herr Richter, April 20th, 1945. "Today, the Americans gave little Greta medicine for her fever. This is not the enemy we were told of. This is confusing. My heart is conflicted." The town elders, including Margarete, began to gather in hushed groups, discussing the impossible discrepancy between propaganda and reality. How could they reconcile years of indoctrination with the overwhelming evidence before their eyes? These soldiers were healing their children, feeding their families, treating them with dignity and respect. Margarete found herself watching Sergeant Miller as he played simple games with the children, teaching them English words for friend and peace. His laugh was genuine, his patience infinite. When Anna ran to him with scraped knees or small troubles, he responded with the instinctive care of a father. "They have children too," she whispered to Frau Weber one evening. "I heard them talking about home, about their families. They miss their babies just as we miss ours." The revelation was staggering. The enemy had been humanized, transformed from faceless monsters into young men far from home, carrying photographs of sweethearts and writing letters to worried mothers. The truth emerged during a quiet conversation on April 25th. Sergeant Miller had noticed Margarete watching him with particular intensity, her eyes holding a mixture of confusion and something that might have been recognition. Through a combination of broken German and patient gestures, he learned her story, how her son Hans had died at Stalingrad, leaving behind Anna and a young wife who later perished in the bombing of Munich. In return, Margarete overheard Miller talking with his fellow soldiers about their own losses. Private Jenkins had lost his brother at Omaha Beach. Corporal Thompson's best friend had died in the Ardennes. They spoke of nightmares, of letters they couldn't bring themselves to write to grieving families, of the weight of survival when so many hadn't made it home. The realization hit Margarete like a physical blow. These weren't the godless barbarians of propaganda. They were young men who had sacrificed everything, who carried their own grief and trauma, who chose compassion over revenge despite having every reason for hatred. "Mein Gott," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "We are all mothers. We have all lost our children." That evening she did something unthinkable. She approached Sergeant Miller with a small loaf of bread she had baked from hoarded flour, her first offering of hospitality to the enemy. When he accepted it with genuine gratitude, speaking softly about his own mother's bread back in Iowa, the last walls between them crumbled. Anna watched this exchange with the wisdom of a child who had seen too much. "Oma," she said simply, "they're not monsters. They're just people who miss their families." The mechanics of kindness in wartime were more complex than they appeared. The chocolate bars distributed by American soldiers were specifically the Hershey's Tropical Bar, developed for Pacific theater operations. These bars were formulated to withstand temperatures up to 120 degrees without melting, using a special blend that sacrificed some taste for durability. Each bar contained approximately 600 calories, nearly half the daily requirement for a malnourished child. The condensed milk came in small, portable cans that could be easily carried in a soldier's pack. Mixed with water at a ratio of 1.1, it provided essential proteins and fats that German children hadn't tasted in months. The logistics of getting these supplies across battle lines involved a complex network of quartermasters, supply convoys, and forward distribution points. But the human cost was equally complex. For German adults, accepting aid from the enemy represented a profound crisis of identity. These were people who had been taught that accepting charity was weakness, that the fatherland would provide, that surrender meant dishonor. Now they faced the impossible choice between pride and survival, between ideology and their children's lives. The psychological impact on American soldiers was equally significant. Many had spent months or years viewing Germans as the enemy, motivated by stories of Nazi atrocities and the loss of friends in combat. Suddenly, they were face to face with hungry children and desperate mothers who looked remarkably like their own families back home. Private Rodriguez later wrote to his girlfriend, "It's hard to hate someone when you're bandaging their kid's scraped knee. These aren't the monsters we were told about. They're just people caught in the same terrible machine we all got fed into." The sheer volume of human-to-human aid, an estimated 3 million meals provided to German civilians by U.S. forces in the first month of occupation, played a critical role not just in preventing widespread starvation, but in dismantling decades of anti-American propaganda, facilitating a remarkably peaceful transition to post-war recovery. May 2, 1945. The war was nearly over, but death hadn't finished with Freistadt. A small group of fanatical SS officers, retreating from the collapsing Eastern Front, had taken position in the hills overlooking the town. They viewed the American-German cooperation as treason of the highest order and launched a desperate attack to cleanse the town of collaboration. The firefight erupted at dawn, catching both civilians and soldiers off guard. Sergeant Miller's unit found themselves pinned down behind an overturned truck as bullets whined overhead. One of his men, Corporal Thompson, had taken a round in the leg and was bleeding heavily. In the chaos, 12-year-old Friedrich Weber, one of the children who had received chocolate and medical care, saw the wounded American soldier. Without hesitation, he darted from his hiding place and guided the unit's medic through a network of bombed-out buildings to reach Thompson safely. This way," Friedrich whispered urgently in broken English, leading them through passages only a local child would know. "Schnell! The bad soldiers cannot see here." Meanwhile, Margarete was organizing something equally unprecedented. As the battle raged, she gathered the town's women and led them in providing water, makeshift bandages, and shelter to the Americans who had shown such kindness to their children. "These men saved our babies," she declared, her voice carrying the authority of her 72 years. "Now we save them." Frau Weber, who had once hidden her infant from these same soldiers, now tended to Private Jenkins' wounds with the same care she would show her own son. Greta Hoffman, whose baby Klaus had been saved by American milk, used her nursing skills to help treat the injured. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 3 SS officers lay dead, and the last organized resistance in the region had been eliminated. But more importantly, the artificial barriers between former enemies had been permanently shattered. As Corporal Thompson was loaded onto a medical transport, he pressed a chocolate bar into Friedrich's hand. "Danke, little friend," he said. "You saved my life." Friedrich smiled and broke the chocolate in half, offering a piece back to the wounded soldier. "We share," he said in careful English. "Friends share." The immediate transformation was remarkable. Within days of the final skirmish, Freistadt had become a model of post-war cooperation. American engineers worked alongside German civilians to restore water pumps and clear rubble. The makeshift clinic became a permanent fixture, staffed jointly by American medics and German nurses who had emerged from hiding. Children's health improved dramatically. Anna gained 12 pounds in her first month of regular nutrition, her hollow cheeks filling out, and her eyes regaining the sparkle of childhood. Klaus Hoffmann grew into a healthy, laughing baby who would reach for any soldier's outstretched hand. The relationship between occupiers and occupied had fundamentally shifted. Instead of resentment and resistance, there was cautious cooperation that gradually warmed into genuine friendship. Sergeant Miller found himself invited to family dinners where he shared stories of Iowa farms while learning about Bavarian traditions. But the long-term impact extended far beyond one small town. Anna Schmidt grew up carrying the memory of American kindness like a treasured heirloom. She became a teacher, then a principal, eventually a regional education director who made exchange programs with American schools a cornerstone of her career. She told the chocolate story to thousands of students over the decades, emphasizing how small acts of humanity could bridge the deepest divides. Friedrich Weber emigrated to the United States in 1952, settling in Iowa not far from Sergeant Miller's family farm. He became a successful businessman and philanthropist, establishing a foundation that provided educational opportunities for children in war-torn regions. He never forgot the lesson learned in those desperate days, that courage and compassion could flourish even in the darkest circumstances. Greta Hoffmann's son Klaus grew up to become a diplomat, specializing in German-American relations. His first memory was of American soldiers saving his life with condensed milk, and he spent his career ensuring that such humanitarian cooperation would continue in peacetime. The stories of chocolate and milk became local folklore, passed down through families like precious heirlooms. Children who had never known war learned about the day when enemies became friends over shared sweets and simple kindness. In the rubble of war, a single act of kindness, sweetened by chocolate and milk, proved to be a more potent weapon than any bomb, forging bridges where only chasms once existed. The story of Freistadt demonstrates that even in humanity's darkest hours, individual choices matter. Sergeant Miller could have followed protocol, maintaining strict separation between occupier and occupied. Instead, he chose to see hungry children rather than enemy civilians, to offer comfort rather than demand submission. That choice rippled through generations, transforming not just individual lives, but the entire relationship between former enemies. The children who received chocolate grew up to become teachers, diplomats, and bridge builders. The soldiers who gave it returned home with a deeper understanding of their former enemies' humanity. Today, as conflicts rage around the world and political divisions seem insurmountable, the lesson of the chocolate soldiers remains relevant. What enemies do we misunderstand today? And what simple human gestures might be all it takes to begin healing the divisions between us? Perhaps the answer lies not in grand diplomatic gestures or political declarations, but in the simple recognition that behind every enemy is a person who loves their children, grieves their losses, and dreams of peace. Sometimes all it takes is a chocolate bar and the courage to offer it with an open heart. The sweet taste of that first Hershey's bar lingered in Anna's memory for the rest of her life, not just as a flavor, but as proof that even in war's darkest moments, humanity could triumph over hatred, one small act of kindness at a time. What preconceived notions have you held that were utterly shattered by a simple, human gesture? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II that will make you question everything you thought you knew about history and the enduring power of human connection.